Talk Money to Me is a financial podcast produced by TransGlobal. All opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of TransGlobal. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as basis for investment decisions.
Hey everybody, welcome to Talk Money to Me, where we talk about money and how it affects you. I'm your co-host Jonathan, and I know a little bit about finance.
And I'm your other co-host, Tracy, and I know almost nothing about finance.
We have two wonderful guests with us today. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Wang. I've also been in life insurance and annuity business for about 10 years now.
Hey guys, it's Stephanie again. Thanks for having me back. I am a personal finance enthusiast.
Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're actually going to be having our guests join us as we do sort of a roundtable discussion to kind of go over and review all the things that we've discussed in season 1 and all the things from season 2 so far. And I wanted to see if we could talk about what it is that we do to budget now or things that we may have done in the past. For me, I didn't grow up with an allowance. It was always about getting money that I need with maybe a $5 buffer from my parents. And so I actually started learning to save money from there, because if I bought a small size of popcorn at the movies instead of a medium one, I'd have a little bit extra money to eventually buy myself a small drink. Now that I'm older and I'm in the working world, I do kind of follow the 50, 30, 20% rule that we discussed in the first episode about budgeting. And most of my savings are just directly going into investments rather than a savings account now.
When I was a child, I used to sell Pokemon cards, in that way kind of funding my own little bank, right? I remember in I believe middle school, they used to give us lunch tickets, and I would sell those lunch tickets as well. And I had a terrible mentality about money. If I wanted something, I would just buy it and not even think about the cost effectiveness of what I'm buying, or if I really wanted it versus what I needed. And so I didn't have a budget at all. Even when I was working at the time, I was just spending all of my money until I was savvy enough to find out that the money that I was making, I can put into investments and make even more money to buy even more stuff. Where I am now is exactly what Jonathan has been saying. I kind of automate everything. And so have everything automated just takes it off your mind, right? You don't have to think about it. It's out of there. Because there's times where you're working and you're looking at your bank account and you see a lot of money, you get very tempted into buying a lot of things, especially things you don't need.
Growing up, my brother and I had really, really different concepts of money, right? So my mom would always joke with other people about how she would give us both allowance, and then my brother would count every penny and say, you missed $1, right? You still owe me this from this one time, right? Transaction wise, my brother has been like that forever. And then I would literally same day treat all my friends to a meal. I would go out and tell all my friends I was rich now, and then be like, don't worry about it. I'll cover all of you. You don't have to pay me back. And then my money would be gone. And then the next day I would say, Mom, I need money for this thing. I think my mom always joked, she never really knew how to encourage or discourage that. Because in some ways that's a generous spirit, right? But in also some ways that's extreme carelessness that is built upon the fact that I've literally never been in want of money. But I also never wanted a lot of really expensive things. So I remember one time my parents took us to Disneyland in the middle of the week during a school day. And I was shocked. And I was like, this would never happen, right? And my parents were just like, no, let's just do it. And I remember thinking that was the biggest, most luxurious splurge that my parents had ever done, right? One year they bought me a video iPod, and I'm dating myself now. But that was once a year, oh my gosh, they just spent all of their savings. In my mind, right, as a kid, I thought they had spent everything. And so when I got to the point where I had to manage my own money, my parents were still covering most of the normal debts that a person would have to face when they become an adult, which is bills, utilities, and then I got my own apartment and I started to have to pay some of that stuff. But even then I was getting quote, an allowance from my parents from my college loans so up till post college, I never, ever had to worry about money. And then I moved home and my parents were still paying most of my bills. Right. So I think now being confronted with the fact, I never thought I had to have savings because I've always felt like I only needed what I needed now. And I thought that that was not a problem. And I didn't know that there were other ways to grow money that weren't savings. And so I was like, well, I'm never going to be able to save more than I'm currently saving, I guess. And it's not worth it because I'm just going to spend it anyway. So might as well just live in the moment and never retire. And I never wanted to retire. So all of those factors, I think, have contributed to the fact that, like, financially, if you just look at my assets or like my bank account, it would look like I'm poor and I have no money. And I didn't know that that was a thing. And I don't feel like I'm poor and I don't feel like I want for anything. But I do think that I could grow a lot in how I save and how I plan for my future. So that's where I'm at.
That's actually really interesting that you bring that, because I grew up, like, my parents, there was three of us. So, and we went to private school, all three of us. So my parents were not in any way like poor, but we were like brought up with a poverty mentality. Like, my mom constantly told us that we were broke and we were struggling financially, and that having three kids is so tiresome and just like so draining, that I, like, all of my siblings and I, we like constantly reflect upon this, but it's like we constantly felt like we were poor. And so we had to, and the strategy to not feeling poor is to achieve great wealth in career and then also save a lot. It's a two-part strategy, right? The issue with that, I feel like, is because of that poverty mentality, I never feel like I never have enough, which is sad. Honestly, it's a sad way to live. It's kind of sad, but so like your mentality about money is a very shaping part of, you know, how you're going to live your life.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never thought about that mentality. Like, I just always thought that I'm just super spoiled. But then, like, if you think about it, I'm not necessarily, right? And so that kind of goes into parenting. It's so interesting that, like, how we're brought up influences how we think about the value of money and this. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, similar to Stephanie, I am also part of a group of three kids in my family. And I wouldn't say that I grew up with a poverty mentality, but I was very strict with myself when I was spending. I have vivid memories of going to the supermarket with my dad, and I would, bring some food that I wanted to put into the cart. And he'd say, okay, so do you need this or do you want this? And I was like, oh, I want it. And he'd be like, well, you don't need it then. And then, when I thought I was clever, I'd get a bag of chips and be like, oh yeah, I need this. And he's like, why do you need this? I'm like, I guess I don't need it. He's like, exactly. But having that kind of strictness on myself, interestingly, I got this from my dad, but from my mom, similar to Tracy, a very generous spirit. And so when it came to spending on people, I would drop whatever was needed to help them feel celebrated on their birthdays. The way that you grow up and your relationship with money definitely does paint a picture of how you choose to deal with it when you're working. And that's been kind of not hard, but a little bit more work than I would have thought of in terms of adjusting it for myself now that I am on my own.
I also think need versus want is in part a cultural thing, right? Like, because there's a little bit of an inherent lie in that, right? Like, who dictates that you can only spend money on what you need? That's not a good, healthy financial practice, right? Because if you feel like you can only spend money on what you need, then that's not a realistic budgeting strategy to me, right? It makes you feel not great. Like, it's not good for your mental health, I think. So, but I also grew up with that, right? Like, I had that question asked of me all the time. Is this something you need? Is it something you want? I don't know what the balance is for that, but I know that it's not that black and white.
I mean, I grew up with I need the everything. It's not that I want it. I need the everything. I want that. I need this. I need, like, that's, yeah. So I'm listening to you guys, and it's the same thing with my parents. We weren't super wealthy in any shape or form, but I feel like me and my other brother, we just made do with what we have, right? And if I wanted something, you would work for it one way or another. If my parents said, no, Richard, I'm not going to buy this. Oh, there was a Spider-Man toy that I wanted. And if they're not going to buy it for me, well, then I need to go out and try to figure out a way to make that money. So it was hustling Pokemon cards, hustling Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I remember selling a card for like $20, which to me was like $100. So I think with my mentality, I do believe that parenting does come with some kind of factor in it. But for me, oh man, then it just means I was a bad kid. I was just going around spending money like it grew on the tree.
No, that is so funny because you saying you sold Yu-Gi-Oh cards like brought up a memory in me that like whenever we went back to Taiwan, I would buy those like fake Yu-Gi-Oh cards and then sell them.
Wow.
Hustling. I love it.
It's so bad. Okay, but more importantly, back onto like the topic, the fact that you were like, oh, I need everything, therefore I must push myself to like get more so that I can afford everything. That's just one way of doing it. Like I have friends that want to like live in a $10 million house, you know, that's the kind of lifestyle that they're trying to achieve. And so therefore they have to push themselves to extreme.
And it's not saying that one form or another is right or wrong. This is also a factor of your personality, right? Mm-hmm. I've met people who have literally nothing and are the happiest people. Or I've seen people who drive super fancy cars, but they are miserable. So, you know, I've always been asked, Richard, would you like to be happy in a Toyota or would you be crying in a Ferrari? And my response to that is you've never cried before. So you don't know what that's like, even in a Ferrari. So I'd much rather be happy with my Toyota, right? And all of this is just something that will fulfill you in the end. When you wake up in the morning, what makes you happy? And if budgeting to the extreme is what makes you happy, hey, I am all for it. If budgeting very loosely is something that's more your forte, I'm all for that as well. But I think the most important thing would be to have a certain goal in mind and to make sure you prioritize certain things. So, for example, in your guys' situations, would you guys have more of an idea of saving up for like a rainy day fund, or would you guys try to take care of any outstanding debts that you might have?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that for me, because I've always been like, this is all I need, no more, no less, right? The couple of times where I've been hit with expenses that were unexpected or that were outside of like my immediate present, which has to do a little bit with the fact that I have ADHD, right? Like the future doesn't exist sometimes in my sort of I don't have a mental capacity to like plan for the future. So what I had to learn was like, even if I have everything I need now, I still should plan for the future. And so I think for me, I prioritize not having any debts so that I'm able to help up, like to plan for the future. So because I was told and I was raised on the mentality that if you can't help yourself, then you can't help anyone else. Feeling like I have a bunch of debt and makes me feel like I can't do anything else, that I have to pay off my debt before, which is kind of where I'm at with that question that you just posed.
With saving for a rainy day fund or paying off debts, I am aware of how much just even being off $1 or $2 can really kind of screw things up. We've talked about how credit cards charge a very high interest rate. And, you know, when it comes to money, people are not particularly lenient about getting their payments back. And so I had always chosen to focus on debts first. And I fortunately reached a point in my life now where outside of the credit card spendings that I have, which I've been able to manage and curb a little bit, I don't have debts anymore. And so now it's about making sure that I'm disciplined in that, hey, I have an extra $50. Maybe I can go buy a steak at Lori's Steakhouse. But I could also just put that away for, let's say I get into an accident. I myself ride a motorcycle. And so part of that lifestyle choice has forced me to make a decision of, okay, just in case, I'll do this. Because at least I don't expect myself to pass away anytime soon. So if the money doesn't go anywhere, I'll treat myself to a steak then.
Buy yourself a steak, Jonathan. That's what I want to say. You do you. Go get that steak.
This ends part 1 of our roundtable discussion. We'll be including part 2 in our next episode. But for now, we'll see you at the next one. Bye.